I will read some portions of this book, Path to Perfection. Some important points I will read from this book, which are beneficial for everybody. We are reading from the diary of Babuji Maharaj. This is on 13th July 1944. From his diary we are reading, and there's a heading given for this diary entry. It's called Life. So I'm going to read that. All of these people will have direct connection with you. Nobody will interfere with your work unless permitted by you. Further advancement is to be taken up when this much of work is perfected, or the trust in its having been perfected is confirmed. Unless conversations are to be given up, absurd dialogues should be avoided. Reading fiction is to be stopped. The heart should not be soiled with love for persons other than he. Mania for friendship is to be given up. God alone is to be taken as friend. Religious treatises soaked in divine love may be gone through. Going through difficult and deep philosophy is not needed. Mutual behavior is to be fraternal. Sympathy with one another, help in time of trouble, and so on. Good demeanor is the very essence of this system. Everybody must have to follow the principles. Adhering to principles of apparent good conduct like getting up early in the morning, practice of meditation, offering of prayer, performance of the duties of household in a proper way, and so on, will be incumbent on everyone. Now, in continuation, the same again, 19th of October 1944, we'll read that. This is a dictation from Lord Krishna concerning the principles of living under the new system of spiritual discipline. The principles of life should be most simple. The habit of speaking truth should be developed. Abstinence from useless audio-visual pleasures. Affection to children. Respect for elders. Service to parents. Honest living. Remaining well-intentioned. Having no covetous eyes on what belongs to somebody else. Avoidance of adopting a threatening attitude to others. Trying to keep cool and calm. Restrain on utterances that may cause hurt to somebody's heart. In spite of all these principles, drawing out one's sword in the face of the enemy is not to be forbidden. But it should be remembered that this drawing out one's sword should be for the defense of somebody, including oneself. Prayer and worship, Sandhya, should be performed twice daily. In view of the altered times, I have not ordered Sandhya a third time. Gayatri is essential. These are ordinary principles which everybody ought to observe. I'll continue again the 21st October 1944 again. Dictation from Revered Master. The above mentioned principles dictated by Lord Krishna are concerned with practice. God's entity should be taken to be one. Useless kinds of worship should be abstained from. Religious bigotry is to be detested. God alone is worthy of worship, and as such, God alone is to be worshipped. Guru should be honored and respected. Such principles are to be adopted as may cause benefit to others. Living should be made so simple that on seeing it, people have an impression of good thoughts. I have always been and am even now opposed to idol worship. Its grossness spoils the heart. A promise to this effect should be taken at the time of initiation. Otherwise also, observance of all these principles of good conduct is essential. Idol worship is to be strictly prohibited. Now I'll read the basic principles, which is again on 24th October 1944. Revered Master dictated the basic principle concerning aspirants under the system of Sahaj Marg. 1. In our fold, much emphasis is laid on faith, aitakad. That is the first step of the staircase. To ripen it is every aspirant's duty. Without this, proper benefit is not derived. Second, every aspirant must first decide in his heart whether this particular method shall do him or her good. And this will be evident to him or her through his or her own experience. Then there should be an orientation to ripen faith and compliance of one's guide's orders and should be considered as duty. Third, it should be made comprehensible to the aspirants that what is being done to them through transmission is not mesmerism or hypnotism, but the way of connecting the aspirant to the ultimate being. And that this is the main thing under this new system, Sahaja Marga. So long as an aspirant does not decide well in his heart and comes to have trust in the guide, there is no need to make him or her start. This is a point you have to, so long as the aspirant does not decide well in his heart and comes to have trust in the guide, there is no need to make him or her start meditation actually. Fourth point, consideration of character is the main thing, and brahmacharya, celibacy, is also strictly essential. This is the way of devotion, and whatever else may be achieved along with. So these are the basic principles. Now I'll be reading from page number 69. I'll just tell you the date of that. This is 5th of September 1944. It's called Following the Guide, actually. That's right. Following the Guide. Here, the subject of Shivaji enters into it. And after reading this, I'll be reading the story of Shivaji's spiritual journey or his spiritual aspiration as told by Swami Vivekananda to his disciples in Chennai somewhere in 1893. The technique of developing softness is to create extreme humility in temperament so that it is filled up with such a sentiment of love as to have no inclination to cause any hurt to anybody's heart. And the words are also such as may not hurt anybody's heart in the least. If he, Mr. M1, is able to do this, it will be imitating me, which is duty for everybody. This is called following the guide. This was my special way, which has not been emulated by anybody. I, however, would not have permitted you, Ramchandra, to copy it. This would make harshness wither away. You do not as yet understand my quality of perfect poverty. As such, very often you remain confused. This thing is as follows. I used to remain in attendance as a slave, servant of his presence, in such a way as to treat myself as insignificant. I had no concern with outward glamour. I considered all belongings, including my home, to be his alone, and was happy under any circumstances. Whatever, you too consider whatever God has bestowed on you to be his alone or mine alone, and remain ever grateful. The example of Shivaji is there. His master, Samartha Guru Ramdas, asked for alms, in response to which Shivaji surrendered everything he had, wealth and riches, throne and crown, etc., to him, and started treating all of it thereafter as belonging to him alone. This example is worth appreciation and expresses my meaning very exactly. By saying this, I do not mean that like N1, you go about screaming to proclaim that all this is Lalaji's alone. There should be this sentiment and a real spirit of renunciation in temperament. This is the superior most form of vairagya, renunciation. You do not feel perturbed. Your condition shall be just this, and this sentiment is already present in you. Its height is not visible due to thorny, bushy growth all around. This thing I have told you today is the sum and substance of the entire training. and is very superior. Somebody may just try to follow it in the real sense. He is sure to enjoy the finest that spirituality may have to offer. The best way to it consists in attaching everything good to God and abstaining from evil conduct. I have referred to this in my response to your diary. Just this practice will be sufficient. Do not take it as something ordinary. Make a note of these sentences from your diary. It is better to copy the entire letter here. So this is, he says, this is the best method, which is surrendering everything to the Guru. So that being so, I would now request your indulgence to follow this story, which is printed by Ramakrishna Mission, as told by Swami Vivekananda to some of his disciples. There was nobody to write down in shorthand what he was talking, but one of his prominent disciples had everything in his memory. He later on wrote it down, and it came out as a book actually. So this is quite a, before we go into the whole thing, it's a fairly long 20-page article. I'll read it. It's quite interesting. A lot of history is also there. So I will read from a small subheading called A Leader with a Mission. Now Swamiji is telling one of his disciples who had a very low opinion about Shivaji. He says people have called him that he has killed Afzal Khan by treachery, and then so Swamiji gets upset when he hears from one of his disciples. I'm reading that. I do not mean, said Swamiji, to dwell on the military exploits nor the excellence of civil government of Shivaji. Those are matters of ordinary history, but I only wish to narrate such instances of Shivaji's doing as will show in relief what a great soul he was. Thus, under the combined influence of Jijabai and Dadaji Kondadev, the boy grew up and became an expert in all martial exercises and accomplishments. Even while he was young, he was joined by many young men of his times in his enterprises against the Mohammedans, which to the people savored of madness, but which, as they increased in boldness of design and execution, were believed by his companions to be the deeds of one specially protected by the goddess Bhavani. These young men, undisciplined and unarmed as they were in their early days, joined their leader Shivaji in scaling mountain forts, descending into the plains beyond the valleys, gathering arms and booty, occupying Mohammedan garrisons, putting their defenders to death, and never relinquishing what they had obtained. So year after year passed, and young Shivaji, as he grew stronger, became more daring and enterprising. His companions sympathized with their young master's spirit of adventure, and they and their kindred spirits proved of eminent service to him in his ambitious plans. There was such a charm about Shivaji's personality that even those who were his enemies and whom he had conquered on the battlefield became his trusted followers. Even the Mohammedans felt the influence that was at work. Shivaji's chief admiral, Darya Sarang, was a Mohammedan and fought with the Siddhi admirals of the Mughals, and so was Ibrahim Khan, a Pathan leader, a Mohammedan. Shivaji, by his great personality, filled the rank and file of his followers with his own spirit, and this was the mission of his life. The men whose powers and counsels helped Shivaji to found the kingdom were themselves endowed with a high sense of duty. Not one failed in doing his duty in the time of danger. Not one proved treacherous to his master or went over to the enemy, while many died at their posts in the hour of victory, consoled with the thought that they faithfully did the service assigned to them by their great and loving master. A religious person to the core. Next, that's the background. Now it comes actually. All this was due to the fact that Shivaji's mind was cast in intensely religious mold, and he continued to be above all religious throughout his checkered career. Shivaji felt in him what religious enthusiasm alone can inspire, the feeling that he had a commission which required him to think little of his own interests and advancement, but to devote his whole life to the cause of his country and his people. To give but a few instances of the religious aspects of the life of Shivaji, said Swamiji, in the first place, one must know that Shivaji was not a man of letters. He despised reading and writing, but he was intensely fond of hearing the old epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and trying to imitate the heroes in the deeds of valor. A fascination for sacred plays or kathas, as they were termed, which had possessed him from childhood, was a strange peculiarity of his character. As he grew up, no distance, no personal danger deterred him from being present at any katha which could by any possibility be reached. He would walk many miles to attend a katha or recital of them by specially noted God-intoxicated, highly evolved spiritual teachers. Sometimes openly and more frequently in a peasant's or soldier's garb, the young prince with a few chosen associates would appear at places where his arrival was incomprehensible and his disappearance equally abrupt and mysterious. In the later days, these kathas became the means of assembling his men without attracting suspicion. But his adherents well knew that the most exciting enterprises immediately followed them. One instance of Shivaji endangering his person on account of his great passion for hearing kathas from godly persons and the miraculous escape he had, I should like to state. Now, Swamiji is narrating one incident. Before that, he is talking about the religious and political upheaval in Maharashtra. I have already mentioned that some of the great saints were contemporaries of Shivaji. And one should also remember that the 16th and 17th century marked an epoch in world's history, being a period of great religious upheaval all over Europe and Asia. In India itself, this upheaval was general and not confined to the Maratha country. It resulted in a widespread popular awakening. In India, religion always preceded national awakenings. In northern India and the Punjab, Guru Nanak went about stirring the people to wake up and made a supreme effort to reconcile the underlying spiritual truths of Hinduism and Mohammedanism. In Bengal and other eastern parts, Chaitanya sought to wean men from the insensate sacrifice of animal lives, accompanying the worship of Shakti and Kali, and bring them to the sweet and loving faith of Bhagavat and many others like Kabir, Tulsidas, etc. Contributed each in his own way to the work of spiritual enlightenment. Though the work of these have been great and abiding, it cannot be compared with the work done by the saints and prophets of Maharashtra. Like the political struggle for independence, the religious upheaval was also not the work of a single man or even of a single century, but always kept pace with the political struggle itself. The Mohammedan invasions for a time seemed to have paralyzed all religious activity, but gradually the national spirit regained its healthy elasticity. And just about the time of the rise of the Maratha power, there was a galaxy of saints whose names have become household words with the people of the country. These great teachers flourished for nearly 2 centuries, and then they seem to have become more or less extinct. And this curiously coincides with the loss of the political power of the Marathas themselves. In this connection, it would be interesting to note what Justice Ranade says. The close connection between the religious and political upheaval in Maharashtra is a fact of such importance that to those who, without the help of this clue, have tried to follow the winding course of the growth of Maratha power, the purely political struggle becomes either a puzzle or dwindles down into a story of adventures without any abiding moral interest. Both European and native writers have done but scant justice to this double character of the movement. And this dissociation of the history of the spiritual emancipation of the national mind accounts for much of the prejudice which still surrounds the study of Maratha struggle for national independence. Many of these Maratha saints were born in low castes. They belonged to all classes and followed all callings. Marathas, Kumbis, tailors, gardeners, potters, goldsmiths, repentant prostitutes and slave girls, and even the outcast Mahars. A few of them were women and a few were Mohammedan converts to Hinduism. Thus, the influence of higher spirituality was not confined to this or that class, but permeated deep through all strata of society, male or female, high or low, literate or illiterate, Hindu and Mohammedan alike. These are the features which the religious history of few other countries can match or reproduce, unless where the elevating influence is the result of widespread popular awakening. These saints, by their repeated preachings and exhortations to the people, Swamiji said, did invaluable service in the awakening and development of the national spirit among the Marathas by rousing their minds from a state of religious torpor and directing them to an enthusiastic observance of the great tenets of Hindu religion, such tenets particularly as forcibly brought to their comprehension the eternal verities of moral law and man's higher spiritual life. It is these preachings and direct influence of one of them, the great Samartha Ramdas, on Shivaji that led to political advancement and territorial aggrandizement of the Marathas. How Samartha Ramdas became the guru of Shivaji and what influence he wielded on his life and doings we shall see later on, continued Swamiji. But for the present, the danger to which Shivaji exposed himself on account of his great passion for hearing kathas and from which he escaped so miraculously was in connection with a religious discourse or sermon preached by the most celebrated saint Tukaram. So he went to one of the kathas of Tukaram. He was one of the greatest of the Maratha saints, and though only a Kumbi or a Royat of the Shudra caste by birth, yet his influence for spiritual upliftment even now is very great. For whoever had read his famous Abhangas cannot but be influenced by the soul-stirring nature of his teachings. He was a great Bhakta of Vithoba of Pandharpur and went from place to place, exhorting people to develop real faith in the living God and eschew all meaningless ceremonies, the literal observances of which, without knowing their significance and the value attached to such show for observance in popular mind to the detriment of the real genuine faith in God, have been one of the causes of spiritual degeneration of the age. The ceremonies which during their early constitution had the sanction of ancient authority and tradition became crystallized and were monopolized by the most learned class, that is the Brahmin caste. And it was against the exclusive spirit of this caste domination that these saints struggled most manfully to protest. To quote Justice Ranade once again, they asserted the dignity of human soul as residing in all human beings, quite independently of the accidents of its birth and social ranks, and by their own lives and example. They have tended to elevate the national conception of man's spiritual nature and shake the hold of caste intolerance. The result of all this elevated teaching is seen in the fact that caste exclusiveness now finds no place in the religious sphere of life and is relegated solely to the social concerns of men, and even there its restrictiveness is much relaxed, as anyone who compares the Brahmins of South India with their exclusively caste prejudices with the comparative indifference shown in such matters in Deccan portions of the Maharashtra. This feeling of indifference is most accentuated at the time of annual religious gatherings and mixed greetings with which the Lord's feast, the Brahmotsavam of Sri Vithoba of Pandharpur, is celebrated on the last day and creates a belief in the minds of all men and women that they are free to attain salvation by faith and love in spite of their low origin. It is said of Chokha Mela, the outcast Mahar saint, that when he was taken to task for his temerity in having dared to enter the temple at Pandharpur, he replied that his God took him inside by force and that he did not go of his own accord. And he at once burst forth with this famous song, "What availeth birth in high caste, what availeth rights or learning, if there is no devotion or faith? Though a man be of low caste, yet if he is faithful in heart and loves God and regards all creatures as though they were like himself and makes no distinction between his own and other people's children and speaks the truth, his caste is pure and God is pleased with him. Never ask a man's caste when he has in his heart faith in God and love of men. God wants in his children love and devotion, and he does not care for his caste. There is greater need now for emphasizing the above truths and urging on all the necessity for the development of real love and faith or true bhakti towards God, a commodity which has become more and more scarce in these days of godless education." Now coming to the Shivaji's attending Tukaram's Katha, how he escaped actually. Such pure teachings had always a fascination for Shivaji. News was brought to him that Saint Tukaram was in a small town about 20 miles from Satara, and that he had arranged to hold a katha in the house of one of the influential inhabitants of that little town. No sooner did Shivaji hear of it Then he made up his mind to attend the Katha somehow that evening. He dressed himself as an ordinary farmer and went to that little town all the way walking. The Mohammedans who had heard of the exploits of Shivaji and were in great terror of him were bent on capturing him somehow unawares and put an end to his life. One of them, who had noticed Shivaji, though incognito, going to the house of where Saint Tukaram was preaching his sermon, carried the news to the commander of the garrison, who immediately dispatched a small party of horsemen to surround the place and capture Shivaji. It was a moonlit night, and it was near midnight when Sri Tukaram was all absorbed in delivering his sermon with a feeling of sincere devotion and great enthusiasm, and the whole audience were listening to him spellbound. In the midst of this audience sat Shivaji in the garb of an ordinary villager, but the keen eye of Tukaram had already detected who he was. Shivaji sat motionless, imbibing every word that fell from the lips of the saint, forgetful of everything around him. In the midst of this soul-stirring discourse, all on a sudden, the saint was observed to stop abruptly and stand for a minute or so motionless and speechless, with eyes turned up as if in deep meditation, and recovering himself, resumed his discourse. Within a few minutes after, it was observed that a figure exactly like that of Shivaji in his villager's garb emerged out of the place and went out of the house, and no notice of it was taken by the audience. On the other hand, Tukaram saw the figure going out, and it was followed by a small band of horsemen that were seen surrounding the place. When Tukaram finished his discourse, it was near daybreak, and after that, he said to have talked to Shivaji in private and blessed him and informed him of the danger he was in, and how the great and merciful God Vithoba saved him on account of Shivaji's real love and faith in him. It is said that the horsemen who followed the track of that figure were lured into a forest from which they could not find their way out till next morning, by which time Shivaji was safe in his house at Satara. The cause of this sudden interruption in the discourse, said Swamiji, was owing to the fact that Saint Tukaram, who was standing facing the main gate of the big house, saw the Mohammedan horsemen investing the house, and he immediately divined the cause to be the presence of Shivaji in the audience. Tukaram had already known of the great love and faith Shivaji had in God, and hence he stopped abruptly and spontaneously sent an appeal to his God Vithoba to save him from the present danger. Truly, God answers the true prayers of a pure heart and confounds the wisdom of the mighty, and nothing is impossible to him. The danger from which Shivaji so narrowly escaped did not in the least abate his ardor for listening to these kathas. On the other hand, it whetted his appetite for adventure, and he was seen on another occasion listening to an exposition of the story of Kuchela by Sadhu Goswami. In the course of this exposition, Goswami began to dwell on the need of a guru's initiation and grace for one's salvation. And he dwelt on the subject with such great feeling and vehemence, quoting authorities after authorities from all parts of our sacred literature, that Shivaji was moved to realize his own miserable state in not having found a guru till then. Sadhu Goswami said that of the fourfold purposes of life, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, the attainment of moksha through the harmonious and proper attainment of the first three purusharthas is the supreme and final goal of life. And until moksha or realization of God is attained, man can never be free from sorrow and sin and from the miseries of unending birth and death. He can never become dhanya, blessed, and his life is lived in vain. Such attainment is only possible when one finds and obtains the grace of an enlightened guru, who is himself one, who possesses a realized knowledge of Brahman or Atman, and who can uplift mankind by his power of grace and universal love. You must not mistake an ordinary teacher of secular and other sciences, or even the clergymen and the priests of other religions, as real gurus. They are far from being such. A real guru is one who has not only realized the Atman himself, but who can reveal the supreme Atman to a fit disciple and help him in that realization. The greatness of such a guru is simply indescribable, and nowhere except in India is the worth of a real guru known and is worshipped as God himself. The need of a guru is nowhere felt as a real necessity for one's spiritual development except in India. And most of our religious writings are full of glowing descriptions of the greatness and need of a real guru. To be more plain, said Swamiji, the soul can only receive impulse from another soul and from nothing else. This Swamiji is telling his disciple, impulse from a guru, that is pranahuti actually. We may study books all our lives, we may become very intellectual, but in the end we find that we have not developed at all in spirituality. This insufficiency of book knowledge to quicken spiritual growth is the reason why we can all talk most wonderfully on spiritual matters and on philosophy and Vedanta. But when it comes to action and the test of character and living of a truly spiritual life, we find ourselves so awfully deficient and lacking in moral stamina. To quicken the spirit, the impulse must come from another soul. You see, Swamiji is telling his disciple Nanjunda Rao, who wrote this, compiled this book actually, that you require an impulse or transmission from an awakened soul actually. It is from the impact of that impulse on a thoroughly purified and fitly developed heart of another that spiritual energy is generated, which can shed peace all around and influence the lives of all that come in contact with them. The person from whose soul such impulse comes is called the guru, the safe real teacher. And the person to whose soul the impulse is conveyed is called the Shishya, the real student. When Sadhu Goswami so feelingly addressed the audience on the need of each man's finding his own guru and how one has lived in vain, though he be the greatest emperor of the world, who has not longed for in his heart of hearts and found a real guru, the admonition went home to the heart of Shivaji, and he felt miserable when he contemplated that he had not found a guru and undergone initiation in his hands and obtained his grace. With this heavy load on his heart, Shivaji returned to his palace, but he could not sleep. The feeling of desolation was so overpowering that every minute of that night he spent in prayer. The next morning he got up determined to find a guru and went in search of Saint Tukaram, whom he had known and whose preachings he had heard and for whom he had the highest regard as a great saint and bhakta. He soon found him in a village near Pratapgarh, and as soon as he saw him, he fell prostrate before him and begged him to accept him as a disciple and initiate him. The great saint was moved to tears at the great bhakti and yearning of Shivaji, and at his humility embraced him, blessed him and said, "Dear Shivababa, I am quite aware of your great bhakti and of your earnest hankering after a Sadguru, and one greater than me is waiting for you. I am only a kumbi," that means a farmer, "and ought not to undertake the task of imparting any initiation to others. Such a task is meant only for a Brahmin sannyasi, and you will soon meet one and get your heart's desire fulfilled." And so saying, he blessed him again and sent him away. What to say of the humility of Saint Tukaram, than whom no greater saint lived at that time? Great as he was, a highly realized God-intoxicated soul as he was, capable of teaching the highest truths of religion and morality, he refrained from doing an act forbidden to his class. The great ones do not break the law, but fulfill it. So this is one end. Now I am coming to the final section. Shivaji's meeting with his guru, Samartha Ramdas. Shivaji left Tukaram and went to Pratapgarh with a heavy heart. He had fasted the whole of that day. So he bathed and went to the temple of the Devi and intensely prayed that if there was a guru who was going to initiate him and save him from these bondages of worldliness, he might appear in his dream and give him darshan. That is a vision of him. So he fasted the whole day, went to the temple and prayed continuously. So the importance of fasting, that's why when Sir also used to make trainers, he insisted that people should go on fast and be in a prayer continuously. After partaking the prasad from the Devi's temple, he slept in that temple that night. In his dream, the Devi appeared as a Brahmin Sumangali or Suvasin and said, There is one Ramdas, an incarnation of Maruti, who has taken birth only for your sake alone, and you will soon meet him. You will then see what will happen through his association with you. Get up and go and see him. So Devi appears in his dream and says that. So saying, she disappeared. Shivaji early next morning left the temple and proceeded further in search of Ramdas. Came to the village of Chaphal and went to the temple of Sri Rama, and there sat in a mandap, deeply contemplating. There a sannyasi by name Somal Nath came to where Shivaji was sitting and asked him why he was so sad and what he was doing. On learning the cause of his sadness and intuitively recognizing him as Shivaji incognito, he gave him a description of Sri Ramdas, saying, "Who can describe the greatness of Ramdas? At the early age of 11, just when the freshness of youth was dawning upon him, the boy then known as Narayan, son of pure Brahmin parents, realized that the world was a dream. The Brahmin parents had arranged to bring about the marriage of this young boy, and everything was arranged on a grand scale. The boy was taken to the marriage pandal, and the bride, a blushing and blooming young girl, was brought to his side. He suddenly left the assembly and fled from the marriage ceremony to the forest to practice austere tapasya. Never since the day of Buddha has the goddess of renunciation chosen so poetic a moment for the deliverance of her devotee. Young Narayan, with warm, healthy blood coursing through his veins, renounced the world and chose the arduous life of supreme love and devotion to God. For 12 years after that, he practiced severe religious austerities, extreme mortification of flesh, vigilant control of the mind, unbroken meditation on his chosen deity were the chief features of his tapasya. Long before daybreak, this boy saint would be seen standing in the waters of Godavari, muttering the sacred syllables of Gayatri, his mind so lost in contemplation as to make him insensible to the biting of the fish, and very often it would be midday before he recovered his normal consciousness. In the afternoon, he would attend to the religious discourses of pious and learned Brahmins, and in the evenings he would go to the temple of Sri Rama, his Ishta Devata or chosen deity, where he passed the first part of the night in prayer and meditation. Thus, day after day, this young boy practiced his religious austerities. He made light all obstacles so common in the way of spiritual progress. He overcame resolutely all struggles and difficulties, and he possessed undaunted courage and was equal to all kinds of tapasya. In the end, with the progress of these tremendous austerities and indefinable, subtle and elusive wheel that seemingly separates spirits from matter began to melt away, and the young saint in his 23rd or 24th year emerged triumphant from his penance. He realized his own self and thus became spiritually free, free from the bondages of birth and death, of sin and merit, dharma and adharma. The long cherished object of his heart was accomplished, and he chose to live thereafter. It was for the world, for the country's good. In short, he became a Jivan Mukta, spiritually free while alive in the body. After this, he undertook pilgrimages all over India. He traveled from Haridwar to Rameshwaram, to the banks of Indus to that of river Ganges. Wherever he went, he saw the depredations and acts of vandalism committed by the Mussalman rulers. He saw these and wept. The proud spirit of Ramdas was deeply wounded at those marks of national degradation. So wherever he went, he tried to rouse the people to a sense of their degradation, established temples for Maruti, built monasteries, awaken and rouse the masses in different parts of the country to a sense of their own fall and to the necessity of re-establishing their dharma. At times, he would go into the forest and spend many days in tapasya in caves. Many wild animals would keep prowling about him but cause him no harm. Again emerge out of it and go about to establish a strong organization for the propagation of the religion. Thus was Ramdas occupied and would soon go over to meet you. So saying, Narsomal Nath also blessed him and departed from there. Shivaji intently listened to the accounts of the life and doings of Ramdas as depicted by Narsomal Nath. The thought of Ramdas now completely took possession of his mind. His eagerness to find him, or at least to have a darshan or vision of him, got such a strong hold of him that he vowed that he would not eat a morsel of food unless he had the vision of his own guru who was going to influence his life and career so greatly. He took a vow not to eat food after listening to Narsimha. So determined, he fasted the whole day, went to the temple and slept there intently praying to the mother for her blessings in granting a vision of his guru. That night he had the desired vision, and the tall, majestic, magnetic figure of Sri Ramdas with his characteristic, graceful, flowing bird with his danda and kamandalu in his hand stood before him. No sooner Shivaji saw the noble figure than he got up and prostrated before him with tears in his eyes and hair set on end and quite overjoyed and blessed beyond description. Ramdas blessed him and said, I know your great earnestness and religious zeal. I know all the inner workings of your heart and what you are here for. I know your great love for your country, your people, your religion, and above all, your great solicitude for the welfare of the weak, the woman, the cows, the Brahmins, and your dharma. Many great things have to be achieved through you. You must go back to your capital and go on with the establishment and expansion of your kingdom and continue cultivating this great bhakti in your heart, and I shall soon meet you. So saying, the figure blessed him and disappeared. It is said that next morning when Shivaji woke up with a great feeling of exaltation and blessedness, he found a coconut by his side, which he carried with him as his Guru's prasad and gave it to his wife. For a few days after that, he was attending to his secular duties, but in his heart, that pining for the meeting of his Guru in the physical form was growing stronger and stronger. And one day he became so disconsolate that he arranged to go on a hunting trip so as to divert his mind a little. With a small party, Shivaji proceeded to a forest about 25 miles from his capital, and each member of the party took his own way and went in search of games. To add to the sense of depression which had settled on the heart of Shivaji, he could not find a single game that day. He got himself detached from the party and wandered far and wide, and yet found no animal worthy of being shot. It was past midday, and he began to feel dejected and to fret for not having bagged a single animal. But far away from the spot where he was then standing, he discerned a cluster of green trees and noticed one or two animals leisurely moving about them. He also found his way to that spot, and when he went near, to his surprise, he found that there were not only few animals, but many were to be seen there. And what was more wonderful, he saw the wild animals such as bears and cheetahs going about without molesting the deer and other wild animals. This made him refrain from shooting any of them. Besides, as he approached that spot, a strange feeling of elation began to displace the previous feeling of depression, and he felt buoyant and cheerful, and a sweet sense of peace seemed to spread not only on his mind, but all around. He wondered what that could be due to, and without disturbing any of the animals, he slowly approached the spot, and ere long, he discovered the cause of all that sudden change in his heart. To his great amazement and delight, he saw sitting under a huge banyan tree in an attitude of contemplation the very noble and grand figure of Ramdas, just as seen him in his dream in the temple at Chaphal. He was in samadhi, perfectly unmindful of his surroundings. Those wild and other animals of the forest were all prowling about him as if to protect him and be of service to him. The moment he saw the figure, his heart bounced with joy. He thanked God with all his heart for his unexpected find, and slowly moved nearer and nearer towards the figure and sat in a convenient spot opposite to him, devotedly contemplating on that figure and intently praying in his heart that he might soon be blessed by him. But Ramdas sat erect, stiff and unmoved. It was getting evening, and Shivaji had to go back to his town lest he might be missed by his subjects. He would not bring himself to cut away from this figure, yet his duty compelled him to do so. With this struggle in his mind and with a sense of intense sorrow at having to part with the greatest object of his search, he left the spot and went back to his capital, determined to go again the next morning. The whole of that night was spent in sweet contemplation of the saint and in the enjoyment of the feeling of contentment and overwhelming joy it brought with it. The next morning he bathed and lost no time in going back to the spot where Ramdas sat in Samadhi. He found him in the same state as on the previous evening. Shivaji also sat in front of him, meditating and devotedly praying in his heart that Ramdas might soon open his eyes and bless him. But even that day he did not awake from the Samadhi state, and Shivaji had to return to his captor in the evening. Again he repeated his visit the next morning and returned with the same result. The ministers and other influential subjects of the kingdom got alarmed at the strange doings of Shivaji, at his utter neglect of the state affairs, and at his own going to the forest every day to see that wizard of the forest, as Ramdas was called by the people, who had power to enchant all the wild beasts and make them dance to his bidding. One day they formed a council and approached Shivaji and expostulated with him on account of this neglect of state affairs. They said, "Dear Raja, why are you thus neglecting your state affairs and going every day to that great Jadu or wizard? It is not meant for you at this age to do so. Very probably that wizard must have enchanted you also. He is a dangerous man. He plays with children as a child and makes every child follow him and play with him. All the wild beasts obey him like faithful dogs and play around him. He stays in one place one day and appears in another far away from it the next day. We hear strange stories of his doings. Why do you go after him? If you want to learn all about your religion, we have eminent Pandits and learned savants who can be made to discourse on the Gita, Upanishads, and all Shastras, so as to enlighten your mind in all these subjects and give you the knowledge that you are so assiduously seeking after." In these and many other ways, they requested Shivaji to desist from going to Ramdas. But Shivaji simply smiled at their expostulation and said that knowledge which he was striving after could not be had from books or imparted by learned Pandits and savants. He hoped that he would soon obtain the grace of his Guru and become blessed. So saying, he paid his usual visit to the place where Ramdas sat in Samadhi. For 9 full days, Ramdas never awoke from his Samadhi. And on the 10th day, he opened his eyes, saw Shivaji sitting before him at a distance, and with a benignant smile beckoned him to go near him. Shivaji was so overjoyed at his being recognized by his Guru and went near him and asked him what became of the coconut he gave him at the temple at the Chapal that night. Shivaji answered that he had preserved it and kept it in puja, shrine. This confirmed in the mind of Shivaji that this was the very person who gave him the darshan that night. Ramdas asked Shivaji to go and bathe in the rivulet close by and return to him. Shivaji bathed and returned with all things required for worship. Ramdas initiated him and gave him the great Taraka mantra of 13 letters called Trayodasha Akshara mantra. He knew no bounds. He was simply transported into a different realm altogether. He could never bring himself to think of separating himself from his great Guru, who had so benevolently opened his eyes to the knowledge of the real. Shivaji therefore asked permission of his Guru that he might stay with him always and serve him. At this request, Ramdas showed some feeling of annoyance and said, "Is it for this that you have come to me? You are not an ordinary man. Your duty is to establish the Dharma which has been tottering on account of the influence of the Mohammedans. You have to destroy the Mlechas and protect all the weak, the Brahmins and the Sadhus. I shall always be near you whenever necessity demands. Let your bhakti or love of God be practiced in secret, while outwardly you attend to all your duties and uphold your Kshatriya Dharma." So saying, he blessed him again and gave him a coconut handful of earth, 2 handfuls of horse dung, and 4 handfuls of stones and sent him away. Shivaji brought these home and gave them to his mother Jijabai, recounting all his experiences to her. Jijabai was well pleased at her son's piety and love of spirituality and asked him what meant those handful of earth, horse dung and stones, to which Shivaji, who had intuitively grasped the significance of those presents from his Guru, replied, "The coconut is for my prosperity. By handfuls of earth, horse dung and stones, it was meant that I would conquer many countries, raise many armies and capture many forts." Jijabai, the proud mother, blessed her son and embraced him. And Shivaji was only 21 years of age when he received his initiation at the hands of Sri Ramdas. thus showing to the world that the development of love of God and the spiritual faculty is not a thing to be put off till one becomes old, decrepit, and unfit for further work, as is generally supposed, nor is it incompatible with the assiduous, hard, and trying duties of even worldly affairs. On the other hand, real spirituality grows side by side with our worldly duties. Running away from the world is not necessary nor commendable. Renunciation is not the negation of noble sentiments and higher aspirations, but the acceptance and carrying out of all our duties, irrespective of consequences, and with an instantaneous readiness to throw away everything at the word of God. To be in the world, yet not of it, is the ideal which everyone should cherish and strive to reach. How Shivaji kept that ideal always before him and how he strove to attain it, we shall make out from a few incidents in his life. I'll catch a breath for a few minutes. There is the thing. Another incident I'll read and then I'll stop here. There's another short episode I will read, which gives you an idea, which actually Lalaji refers in that book actually. To give only a few incidents from the life of Shivaji, which shows in what esteem and reverence Shivaji held Ramdas. After his initiation by Ramdas, Shivaji returned to his palace and made it a point to visit his Guru once a week every Thursday and take advice from him on all matters. He used to consult Ramdas invariably before any undertaking was made. Once it so happened that he was attacked by Mohammedans who surrounded him, his capital, and he found it impossible to pay his weekly visit to Ramdas. This made Shivaji very sad and restless. He was devising all sorts of means to go to Ramdas anyhow, but the enemy was too strong and all advised him not to risk his life, but to give up the idea for the moment. But Shivaji would not listen to them, yet at the same time saw the utter futility of his attempt to do so. In utter despair, he vowed in the midst of the large assembly that he would not do anything, not even move his little finger to defend himself against the attacks of the enemy without consulting Ramdas. So determined, he turned from the assembly to go to his private apartment when suddenly Ramdas appeared in the assembly, to the wonder and amazement of all that were present, who one and all, including Shivaji, prostrated before him. Ramdas blessed them and told Shivaji that he should now not vow like that in future, for it might be, he said, that he was far away from him and not able to accede to his wishes. But Shivaji insisted on consulting him always, whatever might be with the circumstances. Ramdas, though pleased at the great bhakti or faith of Shivaji, advised him not to do so, but to consult the wishes of Bhavani whenever he was in doubt about any matter. Shivaji asked him what he should do if the Devi did not appear to him in vision. Ramdas gave him certain definite instructions as to how he should proceed to ascertain the wishes of Devi, how he should bathe, keep vigil and fast, keeping two persons near him, one to write down the questions and the other to take down the answers, which would be given by the Devi through Shivaji himself, after first making Shivaji to get into the condition of trance. So saying, Ramdas assured him of his success against the Mohammedans and disappeared from the scene. Several have been so-called miracles performed by Ramdas as necessary arose, such as feeding 2,000 followers of Shivaji on one occasion from food received from a cave, of creating water to quench the thirst of people from under a rock, and the sacred place where this occurred still goes by the name of Kabadi Yoga Danda Tirtha. But let us note one instance which gives a striking proof of the highest unattachment which Shivaji had for anything worldly and the great sacrifice he had made in his heart to the feet of his Guru. Namely, of the three great sacrifices, the body, mind, and all his possessions, which a true disciple has to make to his Guru or God incarnate on earth. It is said that one day Shivaji was in the fort of Satara and saw Ramdas begging in the city below. He went to his chitnis, head writer, Balaji Abaji, and dictated an order, sealed it with the royal signet, and went down into the street where Ramdas was begging and placed it in his wallet Ramdas said, "Does paper appease hunger?" And on opening the paper, he found it contained the gift of Shivaji's whole kingdom to him. Whole kingdom, he wrote it with the royal signia and gave it to him. Ramdas asked Shivaji what he proposed to do after he was dispossessed of his dominions, to which Shivaji replied that he would pass his life in the service of his great preceptor. "Very well," said Ramdas, "follow me now." He threw his valet over the king's shoulder and asked him to go and beg and ask for alms. Shivaji readily obeyed, and without the least hesitation or any feeling of shame, he went from house to house in the very fort of Satara and begged. And when he had collected sufficient flour, he went to the river with Ramdas and laid the alms he collected before him. Ramdas baked 2 cakes, chapatis, from it and ate one himself and gave the other to the king. After breakfast, Ramdas asked Shivaji how he liked his new calling, to which he replied, and the reply was that he was perfectly satisfied with it. Then Ramdas asked him to take back his kingdom, to which Shivaji, with a saddened heart, replied, "You may ask me to do anything, but do protect me from the sin of Datta Apaharam." It's called Datta Apaharam. That is, taking back one's own gift. Don't make me a sinner of that Datta Apaharam, he says. Then Ramdas inquired whether Shivaji would obey his commands, and being answered in the affirmative, he bade him go back to his palace and rule his kingdom in the name of his preceptor. And this the monarch readily obeyed. And from that day, as a sign of that kingdom belonged to an ascetic, he adopted the ascetic orange-colored cloth for his banner, the great Bhagwa Janda, as it was called. This banner is still preserved in the Museum of Collections of various things which belong to Shivaji, so enthusiastically obtained from various sources, and at such great expense by Mr. Purushottama Vishrama Mauji of Bombay. Such indeed was the great and pure heart of Shivaji, which had no attachment whatever to the things of the world. His conduct throughout shows an unwavering adherence not to the exigencies of the passing moment, not to projects of personal ambition, but to certain leading principles of action and administration, which has prescribed to himself as the adequate and necessary means to his grand end. So I think I'll end this here. This shows what Lalaji himself says, that the definite way of spiritual progress is surrender only. And he says, example of Shivaji should be kept in our mind. When I read this, I thought I should share this, because this is not, I didn't find in any other. I'm myself admirer of Shivaji. I read quite a lot about him. But this aspect I didn't find in any other source actually.
Shivaji has made Sajjangad for Saint Ramdas.
Okay.
It's near about 3 hours from here. So we had been there once, and we got where Saint Ramdas took Samadhi at Sajjangad. So we got the Dasbodh in Gujarati from there. So Dasbodh is his on Gita. And the incident that you described, I think Mahajanji had forwarded me. वो एक मराठी movie में है, संत तुकाराम. Mahajanji, कौन से movie में है? But it's like a 5-minute incident in that.
Sant Tukaram only. And the actor who played the role of Tukaram had actually become Tukaram only. Yes. He did not take a single pipe from the producer, and he himself had become Tukaram from that date of his acting. His name is Vishnu Pant Pagnis.
Okay, good.
And Shivaji used to say always that he Srinji Icha. That was whatever in the course of ruling his territory, he was always saying the last word, he Srinji Icha.
What is the meaning?
Whatever I am doing is, it is a God's wish.
Okay.
Sri is for the God. He Srinji Icha.
Okay, can you repeat the words, Marathi words?
He means this. Srinji Icha.
Srinji Icha.
God's wish.
Okay, okay. Padmaja, the book is available in Ramakrishna Mission bookstore in near Lower Tyne Bund. It's called Shivaji the Great, as viewed by Swami Vivekananda. So this is the book actually. It's quite available. It's a small book. I just finished non-stop. Single day you can read it. Half a day you can finish it. Anything else? I thought it's a very inspiring story. That's what I felt that I should share it with all of you. Okay, then we'll meet next Sunday.